My fiancé said the house was ours. His parents said it was a gift. But his ex-wife said, funny, they promised me the same thing. So I signed papers that changed the wedding. The first time I heard about the house, I was sitting at Caleb's parents' dining table, trying to act normal while everyone else acted like they were waiting for me to react. His mother, Valerie, had made dinner. His father, Graham, sat at the head of the table with this calm, pleased look on his face. Caleb kept squeezing my knee under the table, like he knew a secret I was about to love. Then Valerie smiled at me and said, "We've been talking about your future." I thought she meant the wedding. Back then, every conversation somehow became about the wedding. The guest list, the venue, the food, the flowers, the seating chart. I wanted something small and simple. Valerie kept calling that sweet, then adding more people anyway. But Graham said, we still have the little house. I knew about it, but only barely. Caleb had mentioned it a few times like it was just some old family property. Small. 2 bedrooms. Old kitchen. Little backyard. Quiet street. Valerie reached across the table and touched my wrist. We want you two to start married life there, she said. No rent. No pressure. A real home. I asked, you mean we'd rent it from you? She laughed softly. No, honey. We mean live there. Make it yours. I cried. I hate admitting that now, but I did. I cried because it felt like someone had just handed me safety. A house had always felt impossible to me. Suddenly, it was sitting there between candles and wine glasses, wrapped in his mother's soft voice. Valerie hugged me and said, we take care of family. I believed her. After that night, the house became part of every plan. Caleb would say things like, when we move into our place, and once we fix the kitchen, and the backyard will be perfect if we ever get a dog. I liked hearing it. I liked imagining it. I liked feeling lucky. Then the word ours started changing shape. Valerie wanted to choose curtains because the front room needed warmth. Graham said the kitchen cabinets should stay because they still had a few years left. Caleb said his parents had opinions because they knew the house better than we did. I told myself that made sense. It was their house. They were giving us something huge. Of course they would care. The wedding planning got tighter too. Valerie wanted more guests. Graham wanted a bigger rehearsal dinner. Caleb kept saying, they're doing so much for us. Let's not make them feel pushed out. So I compromised. Then I compromised again. I told myself being grateful meant being flexible. One night, Caleb and I were eating takeout on the couch when he said, my parents think the house should stay in my name after the wedding. I looked at him. What does that mean? He kept his eyes on the TV. Just legally. Since it's coming from my family. I thought your parents owned it. They do. For now. Eventually they'll transfer it. To you. He nodded. That's the cleanest way. I put my food down. So I'm moving into your house? He looked annoyed before I even finished. Our house. Don't make it ugly. That word bothered me. Ugly. Like asking who owned the home I was supposed to live in made me greedy. I said, I'm not trying to make anything ugly. I just want to understand. Caleb sighed. You're going to be my wife. Why are you acting like a tenant? I didn't know how to answer because that was exactly how I was starting to feel. A few days later, I asked if we should put everything in writing. Not because I wanted half of something that wasn't mine. I just wanted clarity. If his parents wanted to protect their property, fine. If the house would someday belong to Caleb, fine. But if I was expected to help pay for repairs, furniture, bills, and improvements, I wanted to understand what that meant. Caleb went quiet. Then he said, why are you already planning for divorce? I hated how fast that made me feel guilty. I said, I'm not planning for divorce. I'm planning for marriage. That means being honest about money. He gave me this disappointed look. My parents are giving us a place to live, and somehow you turned it into a legal problem. The next day, Valerie called me. She sounded hurt before I even said hello. She told me Caleb had mentioned I was uncomfortable with the house arrangement. She said she thought I understood generosity better than that. She said they were opening their family to me, and I was making them feel like strangers. I apologized. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because she sounded so wounded that I panicked. I told her I was grateful. I told her I didn't mean to offend anyone. I said I just wanted everyone protected. There was a pause. Then Valerie said, protection is what people ask for when they don't trust family. That was the first time the house stopped feeling like a gift. A week later, I ran into Audrey. She was Caleb's ex-wife. I knew her name. I knew they had been married before. Caleb always described the divorce as sad but simple. They grew apart. She wanted different things. She was bitter toward the end. I never pushed for details because I didn't want to be the insecure fiancé digging through old pain. I saw her at a coffee shop. She recognized me first. At first, she looked like she wanted to leave. Then she walked over and said, "You're Caleb's fiancé, right?" I said yes. She gave me a careful smile. Not friendly. Not rude. Just careful. Then she asked, "Are they giving you the house?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't mentioned the house. I didn't even know how she knew. I said, kind of. "Why?" Audrey looked down at her cup, then back at me. "Funny," she said. "They promised me the same thing." I didn't answer. She glanced toward the door like she was deciding whether to keep going. Then she said, "Make sure everything is in writing before you put $1 into that place." I asked what she meant. Audrey told me she and Caleb had lived in that same house during their marriage. His parents owned it, but everyone treated it like their future home. She helped pay for repairs because she was told the house would eventually be transferred. Roof work, flooring, appliances, part of the kitchen. Not little decorations. Real money. When their marriage ended, she asked about getting some of it back. Not half the house. Just something fair, because she had helped improve a property she was now leaving. She said Caleb's family made her feel disgusting for asking. They told me I had lived there too, so I shouldn't act like I was robbed, she said. Then they said they'd make it right later. They never did. I wanted to think she was lying. Honestly, I did. It would have been easier if she had sounded bitter or dramatic. But she didn't. She just sounded tired. I asked why she was telling me. Audrey looked at me and said, "Because I wish someone had warned me before I became the problem." I left with my drink untouched. That night, I asked Caleb about it. I didn't attack him. I just said I had run into Audrey, and she told me she used to live in the house. His face changed immediately. He sighed like I had dragged something dirty into the room. Of course she said something. I asked why he never told me. Because it doesn't matter. It matters to me. He rubbed his forehead. Maya, she lived there because we were married. She paid for some things because she lived there. That doesn't mean she owned it. She said your family promised to pay her back. She says a lot of things. That answer made my chest tighten. I said, "Did they promise?" Caleb looked at me for a moment too long. "There were conversations," he said. I almost laughed because that was such a careful, cowardly answer. He got irritated. She wanted money she wasn't entitled to. For repairs. For a house that wasn't hers. I stared at him. "And now you want me to live there, help with bills, maybe help fix it, and trust that it's ours even though my name won't be on anything." He stood up. "You're twisting this because Audrey got in your head." "No," I said. "I'm asking the same questions she asked." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said, "That's what worries me." That sentence stayed with me. Because it wasn't loud. It was calm. Almost disappointed. Like I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. Over the next few days, I asked more questions. How much had Audrey paid? What repairs had been done? Why had nobody told me she lived there? What would happen if I put money into the house after we got married? Every question made Kayla colder. Valerie said Audrey had always been good at turning people against each other. Graham said she was using me to hurt their family. Caleb said I was letting old drama poison our future. Old drama. That was what they called another woman's money. My friend Paige was the first person who didn't tell me to calm down. I told her everything over coffee, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Forget whether Audrey is telling the whole truth. Look at how they react when you ask to protect yourself." That hit me harder than anything. Because maybe Audrey had her own version of events. Maybe she remembered things differently. But Caleb's family wasn't confused by my questions. They were offended by them. Paige told me to save everything. Texts, messages, notes, anything about the house, repairs, wedding money, and what I was expected to pay. So I did. At first, I felt dramatic. Then the pattern started showing up in writing. Valerie had sent links for kitchen tiles and said they would look beautiful once we made the place ours. Graham had messaged Caleb about a water heater that might need replacing soon and said it would be good for us to take ownership of the home. Caleb had written, "My parents will probably transfer it later, so don't stress about ownership language right now." Ownership language. That phrase made me sick. A few days later, Graham asked us to come over and clear the air. The second we arrived, I knew the air had already been cleared without me. Valerie sat in the living room holding a mug she never drank from. Graham had a folder on the coffee table. Caleb sat beside me, but not close enough for our legs to touch. Graham said, "There seems to be confusion about the house." I said, "I think there is." He nodded like we were in a meeting. The house remains ours for now. You and Caleb can live there after the wedding. We'll decide later when to transfer it. To Caleb, I said. Graham paused. Yes. I looked at Caleb. He didn't look back. Valerie said, that doesn't mean it isn't your home. I asked, would my name ever be on it? The room went still. Finally, Caleb said, why does your name matter if you trust me? And there it was. The whole story in one sentence. Why does your name matter? Why does proof matter? Why does protection matter? Why does fairness matter if you're a good woman who knows how to be grateful? I said, because trust doesn't replace paperwork. Graham's jaw tightened. Valerie looked wounded. Caleb stared at the floor. Then Graham opened the folder. Inside was an agreement. Not court papers, but serious enough to make the message clear. If we lived in the house, any money I spent on utilities, repairs, maintenance, renovations, or furnishings would not give me ownership interest. If the marriage ended, I would leave with my personal belongings. Any improvements would stay with the property. I read it twice. Then I looked at Caleb. You knew about this? He said, it's just to avoid confusion. Something inside me went very still. I asked, so I pay to live there, help improve it, and if anything happens, I walk away with nothing. Valerie said, you're making it sound harsh. I looked at her. That's what it says. She started crying quietly. Caleb immediately shifted toward her like I was the one hurting everyone. I stood up. Caleb followed me into the hallway and whispered, you're humiliating me. I whispered back, you handed me a document that makes me easier to erase. His face hardened. Audrey really did a number on you. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain. Because it wasn't Audrey. It was the pattern. Audrey asked questions and became greedy. I asked questions and became ungrateful. Audrey wanted repayment and became manipulative. I wanted clarity and became poisoned. Different woman. Same script. I took a photo of the agreement before we left. In the car, Caleb didn't speak until we were almost home. Then he said, if you turn this into a bigger issue, I don't know what happens to the wedding. I looked out the window and said, maybe that's the first honest thing you've said. He gave a short, humorless laugh. So what, you're going to cancel everything over a house? I wanted to say no. I wanted to be reasonable. I wanted to find a compromise. I wanted to believe love could soften whatever this was. But the house wasn't just a house anymore. It was a test. The wedding was the deadline. And I was being asked to prove I was trustworthy by giving up the right to protect myself. That night, I slept on the couch. The next morning, Caleb made coffee like everything was normal. He kissed the top of my head and said, we should apologize to my parents together. I asked for what? For how last night went. I said, I'm not apologizing for reading a document they handed me. His face closed. The argument that followed was quiet, but it hurt more than shouting. He said I was letting fear ruin our future. I said he was asking me to invest in a home where I had no protection. He said marriage wasn't about keeping score. I said only people holding all the cards say that. Then he said, you're acting just like my ex. I stared at him. He seemed to know he had gone too far, but he didn't take it back. I said, that's because you're treating me like her. He left for his parents' house that afternoon. The wedding was less than 2 months away. For 3 days, messages poured in. Valerie said I was breaking her son's heart. Graham said I had been manipulated. Caleb said everyone was disappointed. A relative told me I was throwing away a good man and a free house because I couldn't handle his past. The story they told was simple. I got jealous of his ex-wife, tried to claim his parents' property, and threatened the wedding when I didn't get my way. It was almost impressive how fast they turned the truth inside out. I didn't argue with them. I signed papers instead. Not the agreement. I signed the cancellation form for the venue. I signed the release to lose part of the deposit. I signed a lease on a small apartment I could afford by myself. I separated the wedding expenses in my name, changed my passwords, packed my things, and moved my money where only I could touch it. Then I sent one message to the family group. I am not marrying into an arrangement where I am expected to invest in property while being told my name, questions, and protection do not matter. The wedding is canceled. Please do not contact me unless it is about returning personal items. Then I muted the chat. Caleb came to the apartment that night. He looked exhausted, and for one awful second, I almost folded. Not because he was right. Because I loved him. Or maybe I loved who I thought he was. He stood in the doorway and said, "You embarrassed me." I said, "You let them hand me that agreement. It was just paperwork. It was my future." He shook his head. "We were going to have a home." "No," I said. "You were going to have a home." I was going to have permission to live in it. He looked at me like I had become a stranger. Maybe I had. He said, "You'll regret this when you realize what you threw away." I wanted that to hurt more than it did. Instead, it made everything clearer. Because he still thought the house was the prize. He didn't understand that leaving was the only thing I had actually won. The aftermath was ugly. Valerie posted vague things about betrayal and fake family. Graham told people Audrey had gotten into my head. Someone messaged me saying I was stupid for walking away from a house in this economy. Maybe from the outside, it did look stupid. A woman gets offered a house, meets the ex-wife, asks too many questions, then cancels the wedding. It sounds dramatic when you remove all the quiet parts. But the quiet parts were the whole story. The way Caleb changed when I asked about ownership. The way Valerie cried whenever I didn't agree. The way Graham already had that agreement ready. The way everyone was comfortable with me paying into something I would never have a claim to. Audrey messaged me after she heard. She didn't gloat. She didn't say she warned me. She just wrote, "I'm sorry. I know this hurts." That broke me more than the angry messages. I sat on the floor of my half-packed apartment and cried for the woman she had been, for the woman I almost became, and for the version of me who cried at dinner because someone said, "We take care of family." I moved into my new apartment 2 weeks later. It's small. The cabinets stick. The bathroom fan sounds like it is fighting for its life. There's barely enough room for my table, and the first night I slept there, I could hear a dog barking through the wall. But my name is on the lease. My money pays for my space. My questions don't make me greedy. My boundaries don't need approval from a family meeting. Caleb tried calling a few more times. I didn't answer. Then he sent one last message saying he hoped I found whatever I was looking for. I almost replied. I almost told him I had. It wasn't a house. It wasn't a wedding. It wasn't revenge in the loud, satisfying way people imagine. It was the moment I realized I could be heartbroken and still leave. I could love someone and still refuse the life they were offering. I could lose the dress, the deposit, and the future I had pictured, and still be less lost than I would have been if I stayed. Sometimes I still miss him. I hate that, but I do. I miss the version who held my hand in grocery store lines. I miss the version who made coffee before long days. I miss the version who made me feel safe. Then I remember that safety disappeared the second I asked to be protected too. Maybe Audrey was bitter. Maybe Valerie and Graham truly believed they were being generous. Maybe Caleb thought trust meant never needing paperwork. But I keep coming back to one thing. If a gift only stays kind while you don't question it, it was never really a gift. So did I overreact by canceling the wedding over a house I technically never owned, or did I walk away before I became the next woman erased from it?